Hi guys, so in this video I want to talk about buy-to-let. We're going to discuss what is buy-to-let. We're going to discuss what sort of money can you make with a buy-to-let, and most importantly I want to go into the spreadsheet and really discuss the return you get on a buy-to-let. So if you were to buy a property and rent it, what kind of return do you get? How fast do you get back your money? I'm going to calculate it here, so let's get started. Firstly, buy-to-let. What is it? The simple answer is you buy a property, instead of living in it, you rent it out. So all buy-to-let is where you go, buy a property with your money or someone else's money that you have access to, rent it out to another person, and then collect the rent, which becomes your income. So what buy-to-let is? Very, very simple. You go, buy a property, rent it out, get income from it. Very simple idea, there's no need to complicate it. And it's a strategy that's been used by many, many people for many, many years. It's something that is quite boring, but can be very lucrative. So let's look at an example of a buy-to-let property and how do you calculate, what sort of money can you get from it. So let's just get started and get right into it. So you have a property, the purchase price of that property, just do that, the purchase price of that property is 100,000. So that's great. What you then need to know is, if you're going to spend 100,000 on that property, how much can you rent it out for? So you look online, you look at comparable properties, they go for about 1,000 a month. So your rent is 1,000 per month. So after you buy it, if it's in decent enough condition, assuming straight purchase, it's in decent condition, you rent it out straight away. That could potentially be your assessment. If it's £1,000 a month, in a year you get £12,000. So you have purchased the flat for £100,000. Your rent is going to be £12,000 a year. What does that mean for your return? Well, you simply take the 12,000, divide it by 100,000, and then you can format it. Let me see how to format. Needs to be a percentage. That's it, done. So that's a 12% return. So if you can buy a property, rent it for 100,000, rent it for £12,000 a year, you get 12% return. You look at that and you think, oh, in my bank I only get 3%, this is fantastic, this is amazing, this is perfect. But this return number can be calculated in so many different ways, and I'm always confused, how do you calculate it? So I'm going to show you other ways you can calculate it, and then we'll really try to discuss what is really the best way. So I would say that we can hide this because we now know what buy-to-let is. This is cash purchase. So if you have the cash sitting there, if you have the cash ready, you can do this. You can spend the money and then rent it out, and then you're gonna have your return. Now let's look at a cash purchase again, but we can add in some more details to make it realistic. So for example, purchase price is still 100,000. However, you're going to need to pay additional dwelling tax, because the likelihood is you've got your own property that you're living in now for yourself, and this is a property you're buying to rent out. So this is not a property where you're going to live and you already have your own one. So you have to pay the tax for additional property. So additional dwelling supplement, it's between, I think it's 5% in England and 8% in Scotland. So let's just take the Scottish one as an example. There's another 8 grand for the tax. Legal, if you buy a property, you have to have a solicitor that does all the paperwork for you. That can be 1,500. I would say that's a reasonable legal fee. I think that's, also agency. you might have bought this property from not a traditional estate agent. It might have been a auction site, or it might have been a sourcer, and you might have to pay the agency fee. So let's just say £1,000 for agency. A lot of the time you don't have to pay, so don't quote me on that one. That's just sometimes. But if you want to get good price properties, sometimes you do have to pay a buyer's premium. So that's some of the key costs in here. Then once you have bought the property, you're likely going to have to do compliance to that property. So what that is gas checks, electric checks, making sure the fire alarms are there and making sure all is in place. So I would allow another £1,000 for that. And in terms of refurb, when you buy the property, you might want to do a bit of painting. You'll realize that something is leaking over there, that needs to be fixed. So let's just say another £2,000 just to get stuff resolved so you can actually rent it out properly. So now we are at $113,500. Let's just do it here. So total is all of that. So as you can see here, if you go into a little bit more detail and if you're trying to be a bit more realistic, your purchase price is actually higher. Then you get the rent, which is still £12,000. However, you probably want to be hands off and you want to have an agency managing that property. You need to pay somebody to find a tenant. You need to potentially pay somebody to do the contract with the tenant, to deal with the deposit and do all of those things. You can do it yourself, but you might want to pay somebody to do it. And if you pay an agency, they usually take about 12%. So the rent times by 10% is an agency fee, and they can do a management service for you. Again, this is just an example, so please don't feel like I'm forcing you to be spending that money, but I'm just giving realistically, based on my experience, some of the things that you have. And you've spent £1,000 on compliance, but then actually every year there's some maintenance issues, some bits and pieces that you still have to pay out, and I would call that maintenance, and I would allow about £1,000 for that. There's gas checks, Legionella checks, you need to re-silicone the shower, you need to do this and that. Quite often there are things like that, so you have to allow some money for it. So the new rent actually becomes 12,000 minus that, minus that. So now let's look at the return. So again, we went a bit more realistic here. So we take the rent of 9,800, divide that by the total amount spent, and then we turn this into a percentage. So for that, we just need to format cells, percentage, 0 decimal places, or let's put 2 decimal places. There we go. So for this, let's remove that. We are now down to 8.63%. So you have to be very careful. Whenever there's all those gurus telling you, there's a property for you, 100 grand, amazing rent, everything perfect, 12%, 15% return, you need to really question, what is this return? Because they could have told you this 12%, which is just purely purchase price as against the rent that you're going to receive. But you might just want to go in a little bit more detail and say realistically how much is it going to be. What about the costs? What about the legal? What about the tax? What are those overall costs? So as you can see, even with cash purchase, taking very simple purchase price versus rent, you can be at 12%. You start becoming a bit more realistic, put in some maintenance, etc. Your return is down to 8.6%. And then you it's still really good. I mean, the bank is never going to offer you 8.6%, but that's not as lucrative. You might have to do a lot of work for 8% return. There might be another investment out there that's better for you. So it's something to keep in mind. Another thing that you need to always remember is capital appreciation. One amazing benefit of property is that when you buy it for 100 grand, it usually appreciates. As the history shows, property goes up in value. So what that means is that you can buy that property for £100,000, take all the realistic sums into account and get 8.60% on your money. That's the return you're going to get on your money. But after 5 to 10 years, you decide, apologies, there's always motorbikes drifting around here. So after 5 to 10 years, you decide, I've had enough property, I've rented out for a while, I don't want to do it anymore, I've got a better opportunity, I'm going to sell up, and that's it. When you sell up in 5 to 10 years, this is not going to be £100,000 anymore. The likelihood is, if it's in a decent area and it's in a decent place with some demand, maybe units and jobs nearby, that 100k can be 150k easily. And then when you look at it that way, you realize you've been making 8.6% for 5 to 10 years. And now it's worth 150k, so you've made an extra 50k in equity. So now when you're selling it, you're going to be making more money. Yes, you have to pay tax on the profit of, or the capital gains of the asset, but you're making good money there. So you've had this really good return plus capital appreciation. And if you factor the capital appreciation into the return, it's always really high. So again, question, what is in that return figure? So right now I've talked through the cash purchase and how that could work. Next one is you've got mortgage purchase. As always, we have the purchase price of £100,000. That means your mortgage, that means your deposit, is going to be 25% of that. So you take the purchase price, times that by 25%. Apologies. £25,000, as you can see here. Again, let's just do a simple example without any other considerations. So that's your deposit. You then have your mortgage, which is going to be 75% of the value, which is quite normal for a buy-to-let property. Now you're going to have your rent. You already know that's going to be £12,000. Then you're going to have your mortgage payment. So for that, usually people take interest on the mortgage. So let's have a look. Well, let's make some assumptions here. So say you take this mortgage at 5 to 6% interest. So you have your mortgage. Let's just assume 5.5% interest. So if your mortgage payment, let's just say 5.5%, because it always changes, but that I think that's a reasonable estimate at this stage. At 5.5%, you're going to be paying of that amount £4,125. So your income, I think this should be income as well. Let's make that yellow. Let's merge and center here. So with a mortgage purchase, you are purchasing the same flat for £100,000. You have your deposit of 25%, so this is the money you actually have to pay out, 25,000. You have your mortgage at 75,000. Your rent is £12,000, and then your mortgage payment, which will come off your rent, is £4,125. What that means is that your income, so rent minus mortgage, is that much. And now you can do return. So your return on investment is this amount of money divided by the money that you have put in yourself, which is that much. In which case, let's format it as well. Percentage, boom. So some people will argue to you that actually if you buy this property with a mortgage, you spend £25,000 on a mortgage, you're going to be getting rent of £12,000 a year, and your interest on the payment on that mortgage is only going to be £4,000. What that means is that you're getting a net or an overall income after the mortgage payments have been deducted of £7,800, but you've only left £25,000 of your money. So the return on your money is actually 31.5%. So this deal gives you 31.5%. In just over 3 years, you've paid yourself back. How fantastic. So as you can see, with a cash purchase, you've got the return on investment of 12%. You become a bit more realistic. You're going down to 8.63% return. But with a mortgage, the return can be measured against the deposit, the money that you've left in the deal. In which case, in here is 31.5%. Crazy, right? Absolutely crazy. Wild number. So you really need to know, you need to really understand what the person's talking about. Whenever someone is trying to sell you a deal on property, what is this percentage return based on? Always figure that out. Always check that. Again, another example. We've got the same thing here. Same thing here. Let's remove the rent for now. We've got 100k, 25 deposit, 75 mortgage. Now let's add in additional tax. So again, being a bit more realistic here, add legal in here, say 1500. What else did we do before? Agency of 1000. Again, let's just use the same numbers. Got agency of 1000. This is agency selling, and this is the agency letting. So remember, in here the agency, this one was what you pay to the agency to buy the property. This is a different agency. It's a letting agency that you pay the money to for them to look after your property and rent it out for you. So don't get confused between those two agencies. We have compliance 1000, refurb 2000. Let's add that in as well. I think they're realistic numbers. So again, we are starting here 100k, £25,000 deposit, £75,000 mortgage. We're going to become more realistic. We're going to put in the tax, legal, agency, compliance, and refurb. Let's look at the total now. The total is your deposit, which is the money you've put in, plus the ADS, plus legal, plus agency, plus compliance, plus refurb. You've had to do all of that, so it's fair to say that that's the money that you have put in yourself. Then you have your rent. We all know 12,000. £12,000. Agency. Letting. Remember, they take 10%. And what did we use in the other example? Maintenance of £1,000. Let's just remove some of those. We have maintenance of £1,000. So income. Sorry, actually, mortgage we also need. Mortgage is the same as it was in here. Mortgage payment is this one. So let's copy that across because it will be the same. Just want to paste the value. So again, let's just put it here. This is scenario 1. From here down to here is scenario 1. Then from here down to here is scenario 2. From here down to here is scenario 3. and then what we're currently doing is going to be scenario 4. So we have purchased it for 100k with a mortgage deposit of £25,000. We've added in all the extra fees, which I think is reasonable. We're taking the rent. From the rent, we're removing the agency and the maintenance and the mortgage. So then we're left with income of the rent minus agency minus maintenance minus mortgage. So this much. So what does that mean in terms of our return? So now we have this amount of money coming in, and this is the money that we've left in the deal. So if you were to format this, make it a percentage, boom, 14.74%. So hopefully in this video I have shown you guys that it's very, the whole return on investment IRR thing is very debatable. Depending on what assumptions you use for the deal, you can present a deal as a 31.5% return on this investment, get your money back in 3 years. You can present it as 14.74% return. You can present it as 8.63% return cash in deal. You can do 12%. So depending on what assumptions you use, whether you have a mortgage, whether it's a cash purchase, what kind of borrowing you have, how you structure the deal, you can present anything. One thing I did not include here is that a lot of people buy the property, refurbish it, and then they get a refinancing in place. So they refurbish it, bring the value up, and then they borrow again. If you do something like that and try to predict what it's going to be in the future, again, you can show any return possible. But hopefully with this, I've given you an idea of the returns you can get for a cash purchase, of the returns you can get for a mortgage purchase and how it's calculated, how people usually calculate it, and then just gave you an understanding that if you change the assumptions, you can present any return you want. If the property is reasonable, you can show any return to get it sold. So don't get fooled by those deals that are out there with crazy return on your investment. Really crunch the numbers yourself, make sure you understand the assumptions, and do this analysis. This analysis is fun, it's quite interesting, I really enjoy doing it, and if you've got any questions, reach out to me. Hopefully that was of some value. I've really enjoyed doing it. I've been wanting to do this return thing for quite a while. You understand what the buy-to-let property is now, you understand what kind of investment it is, and most importantly, you understand the whole return on investment lingo and how it can be massaged depending on what numbers you use. Right guys, thanks for your time and looking forward to the next video.